Lower Sinai is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Ruben and Edeta Bethany. Halapakan naman dyan na Mayan Chapel is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Bernabé and Chrissy Sabagay. Halapakan Chapel is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Janelle and Marianne Francas. Condemon Chapel Collected. A total amount represented by Mr. and Mrs. Janelle and Maribel Malyasa. They were able to gather a total amount and Christy Autism. We were able to gather a total amount of 3,000, able to gather a total amount of 4,590 pesos. Hanap Pamela ang representante ng Kailangan Working Chapel. Our product chapel is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Evelyn and Michael Achas. Our chapel was able to gather a total amount of 4,000. Very good chapel is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Joel and Odette Daga. They were able to gather a total amount of 4,000. And Ronald Madera. They were able to gather a total amount of 5,426 and supported by Mr. William Magapa. They were able to gather a total amount of 5,550 pesos. A round of applause for our summer. Mrs. Raquel Fabio being supported by Normal Evangeline Atlas. Super Chapel is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Ronald and Rogelyn Lincoln. They were able to gather the total amount of 8,000. Congratulations, Super Chapel. Being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Aljo and Alpi Reveal. They were able to gather the total amount of 8,600 and represented by Mr. and Mrs. Feliciano and Jeremiah Henning. So it's being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Jabbar and Rayleigh Roberts. They were able to gather the total amount of 11,000. Congratulations, Mayan Chapel, here as the fifth runner-up. A round of applause, please. Fatima Chapel is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Rogelyn and Irving Cababao. They were able to gather the total amount of 12,121 pesos.
Libot.
Our first runner-up from Fatima Chapel. Chapel is being represented by Mr. and Mrs. Alonso and Arlene Iba. They were able to gather a total amount of 13,780 pesos. Ladies and gentlemen, our third runner-up from Bravo, Mr. and Mrs. Edelito and Leonida Quintana. President Chapel was able to gather the total amount of 26,383 pesos.